Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us in the latest of our webinar series here at TSC. We're going to give it another moment or two to allow time for everyone to join, and then we will get started. So thanks for your patience, and we'll be with you soon. Again, if you're just joining us, we thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon at TSC and our next in this webinar series. We're going to give it just another moment or two to try to allow time for everyone to join, and then we'll get started. All right, it's 2 minutes past the hour, so we will get this party started. Thank you for joining us again. This is Jamin Steelman with the team from TSC. We are eager to talk to you this afternoon about AP automation, such a fun topic, so many possibilities. And to present today, we have Jack Roberts, the founder and CEO of TSC. Jack, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Jamin. Hey, everybody. Thank you for attending today. We appreciate your time and attendance. We will be hopefully educating you on all of AP automation with what we can do in 45 minutes. But as Jamin said, I am the founder and CEO of TSC, and you met Jamin already. We've got Tom on the line as well, our VP of Sales and Marketing, as well as Heather Heath, our marketing coordinator. So if you need any other topics covered in these kind of webinars, please feel free to reach out to Heather. She is the one coordinating these and taking feedback, and we were actually getting a lot of feedback from the people that have attended in the past on different topics they'd like to see. So hopefully this will be educational, quick, informative, and then on to the next one. Just a little background about TSC. We were founded in 2011 to be a complete resource for ECM. What does that mean? Basically, this is what we do, live and breathe this whole content management, docket management, content services, whatever buzz term you want to put in there. We help you manage your information, automate the access to that information, and then be able to do stuff with it. We are a true ECM partner, so we can help sell you the software, we can help install the software, we can provide training, we can provide support. We also do a lot of staff augmentation with respect to on-base managed services, so we'll have a slide about that to talk a little bit more about who we are. But we're your complete partner from advanced capture all the way through storage retrieval with records management and retention. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We've got the purpose of AP automation, automating invoice capture, vendor matching and validations. We'll go into three-way matching, approvals, key integrations. We'll spend quite a bit of time talking about the different top level, highest recognition, if you will, according to Gartner. The ECM partners are, the ERP partners are out there. And then we'll go into specifics about how OnBase integrates with all of those. We'll talk about a reconciliation. This is a product that we wrote that we feel is key to making sure that every document that we bring into the system can also make it to the ERP, have full reconciliation to know, is it in advanced capture? Is it in our workflow to be processed, to be approved? Is it all the way through to the ERP, so we can make sure that we account for every document that comes in the door? And then we'll wrap it up with Q&A. Okay, purpose of automation. We like to talk about it in different ways, but these are your top three if you break it down. The challenge on the first one is high cost and poor cash management. What does that mean? Well, it's very hard to know how much money we have on hand if we don't know how much money we have to pay out. So managing that as expectations of where's our accounts payable, what do we owe on invoices and bills, where are we at with this? All of that helps streamline this process. The other piece is we get into a rut and we have the same process that we use for 20 years. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Okay, but we're not keeping up with efficiencies as well as technology. So we're no longer then able to deal with when employees leave. So let's say they have fulfilled their duties, they're excited that they're going to go start a new chapter in their life and retire. Well, all of that information they have in their head is now leaving with them, and we do not have it documented. That is a common thing we hear quite often. By standardizing and putting in a full AP automation process, we can now standardize it as well as include the last bullet here, which is increase our visibility and management of the process so we know what is it we have to pay, when is it due, how much money will we have on hand at the end of the quarter, and we can help have a full visual into what's there for us. So we talk about accounts payable and how that works. Well, there's three main key criteria that we kind of touched on a little bit more in the previous slide, but here we have it with respect to our staff. We're asking more and more people to do more with less, meaning that we're going to have fewer people. Those people will also be remote. How do you deal with that? How do you handle that in today's world? We all know thanks to COVID, we're able to work remotely, but in order to work remotely, we need to have some sort of automation. Invoices come in, packing slips come in, vouchers come in. We need to make sure we have those digitally so we can access them anywhere, whether that be from our phone, our computer, and not worry about the sneaker net of paper going back and forth. We also want to reduce this manual data entry that we have of keying in information off of an invoice, as well as make sure that we're consistently taking care of any kind of early payment discounts, making sure that we don't incur any additional charges based on, did we receive everything in this invoice? If we didn't, how are we going to handle that? So we're going to have standardization in our procedures documented. And then it helps us to be fully compliant, especially for those organizations that have to be fully SOX compliant and all around where we're having everything being audited. We'll have full visibility from beginning to end. So we like to see a visual, right? We want to say, what happens here? Well, we can scan or import. Maybe we're receiving our invoices via email. So if that's the case, we can have a system set up to monitor that email inbox. Let's say it's AP@. For instance, ours is AP@tsc-ecm.com. We have OnBase set up to monitor that actual inbox as it comes in. It'll extract off the actual attachment, classify it, make sure it's an invoice, and if it is, it pulls off the high level information we need and then goes into an OnBase workflow so that we can actually manage it and say, okay, when is it due? Make sure we know in advance when it's due. Are there anything that's supporting documents, like do we have a PO with that? Do we need to make sure we've received the product before we can go on and do anything else with it? So all those things are there for us. And then finally, we can push it over to whatever ERP system we need to, thanks to the power behind the OnBase workflow. So we talking about this. What's the first process in the whole thing? We're going to receive an invoice. What do we do with it? So we need to be able to take and pull this information off. The document itself does nothing, right? It's always the information on the document that's valuable. So today we're going to talk about two specific products. On the capture side, we're going to talk about the IBM DataCap software solution that is much like the OnBase workflow solution, meaning it's point-and-click configurable. You can write your own custom code if you need to, but 90+% of the time, you're able to point and click and create the rules you need to be able to take care of automation. So we're talking about extracting invoices, and there's different types of information we need off an invoice. It could be header footer, meaning that we just need the vendor name and invoice date, invoice amount, all that kind of stuff. Then it could be that we need to get the actual invoice line items and do any kind of math calculation on those. So we'll look at all of those. But we really like the fact that we can add in these business rules and be able to integrate with third-party applications from a point-and-click kind of solution. And if for some reason we need to do custom APIs, we can do that in here, write our own code in Visual Studio. We can also utilize the out-of-the-box features to connect to almost any ERP that is in the quote Gartner Magic Quadrant. We'll talk about that in a little bit further. So are you guys seeing? I assume you're seeing my screen okay?
Yes, Chuck, we are seeing it. We actually are seeing the presenter mode, so it may get a little bigger if you were able to switch.
Oh, thank you for that. I don't know what I was doing there. Let's just try that again.
Happens to the best of us.
Right. Let's see here. It's not letting me pick which one I want here. Let's just stop that for a second. We're going to present it right here. So sorry about that.
It's official. You're not a robot.
Hey, all right.
You do
I've
make
been called a
mistakes
lot
once
worse.
in a while.
All right, let me just get this over here. Go figure. Multiple screens is actually causing a problem.
That never happens to me. I don't know what you're talking about.
All right. Well, Jamin, can you take away presenter mode and give me presenter mode again? Because it's not letting me choose which screen I want. So now we all know who's the real boss here. Who's in charge, right?
Well, I didn't want to say anything.
It's all right. You want to hand it back over, Jamin?
Yep.
Now you're the presenter. I see your screen.
Oh, great.
There we go. How's that?
Perfect.
There we go. Thank you for pointing that
Now
out.
I don't need my glasses.
Right on. Now you can see and not have to be 2 inches from the monitor.
Exactly.
All right. So apologize about that little snafu. Hopefully we're good to go now. So what are we talking about? We're talking about DataCap and what it can do with respect to out of the box. There's a pre-configured accounts payable invoice solution that allows you to quickly identify invoices. It'll pull off header and footer without a problem. It goes out and uses rules to try to find information, much like the other tools that are out there. You can use keywords like invoice number or invoice pound. It'll allow you to use a derivative there of those. You can use regular expressions. It has what's called fingerprints, which are, think of like dynamic templates that get created once it sees and learns. It learns on the fly with new invoices that come through. So the first time it sees a new invoice, it will prompt the operator and show them, here's what the fields we found. Help us find the other fields that are required that are not found. And likewise, we can do all kinds of cool stuff with learning line items. A lot of products say they can do line items, but they're really good with single page line items. How do you handle like a phone bill, for instance, or utility bill that has multiple pages? Do you even dare push that through an automated capture solution? Some can handle it, some can't. We would encourage you to say, bring us some examples of PO invoices and non-PO invoices so we can talk about those and show you how that can work. But the cool thing is, as I was saying earlier, it's a nice way to be able to do matching validations without writing code. And then also we can do a little bit more interesting approach is we can do a line item three-way match, meaning that we have our invoice. We pulled off the line items off of an invoice. We're now going to compare those to what was in our ERP system with a PO line item and match one for one on the line items. So we can make sure we match the quantity, the line item, the unit amount, and total cost. We'll give you examples of this as we go forward. Okay. Here's an example of how this works with OCR technology. We're going to take an invoice and we're going to learn how that works. We're going to go out and try to automatically find different things like a vendor name, who we're going to ship it to, so we have an address with that vendor. We'll do a lookup to make sure we can get a valid vendor name, have a vendor number. If they're not in our system, we can automatically flag that invoice and put it on hold so that we say, okay, we have to have a valid vendor in there. If they're not in our system, we could potentially go ahead and process this this invoice as is, and let our workflow in the background handle that inside of OnBase. So we have all kinds of cool things to take care of here. Just a quick visual of when we talk about things like where we're finding line items and what happens. Here's our terminology with a visual of where you're at and what you have. This is an example of the screen that you get pre-configured out of the box. As you can see, it has our header and footer information as well as line items that you can capture. It does do color coding, and just know that this is the thick client. There is also a web client you can use as well. The cool thing about the thick client is we can make that look and feel however you want. So if you don't like this layout, you want a different layout, you have a solution you're replacing and you want it to mimic that kind of screen layout, we can do that. But you'll notice that on this screen, we have several different options. You'll see the big area on the left-hand side, that's our invoice or our image. On the right-hand side, you can see we have white snippets, that's actually pulling from the image itself. The blue-green area, that is actually what it's reading, so that's the OCR value. If you see anything in yellow, that means it's below our confidence threshold. Currently, out of the box, it comes with all confidence. The OCR confidence, when it reads a character, has to be at least 90% confident that it got it right. Anything that's below that will show up in yellow. Doesn't mean it's wrong, just means caution. And then if anything fails a validation, for instance, you will see that come up in red. So if we wanted to validate a date, is the date in the right format? Did we have an invalid date? Was it a typo? Was it a high confidence issue with OCR that thought it got it right, but it was really wrong? So we're going to see examples of that as we go through. But the cool thing is, with this screen layout the way it is, we can simply say, I have this PO number, I want to do a lookup. I want to go through and do different things. Like here's the yellow I was talking about with respect to the line items and the low confidence. As we look, it actually pulled it right from the invoice right here. You can see it on the full image itself. You can zoom in on this if you wanted to, do some different things, but it's a one-to-one. It also shows you right above, so you can see all the line items as we work through it. And as we go through, we can even see we've got line item matching happening. So we've got the PO line, and found it on line 10, line 20, line 30, line 40. Look, we didn't have a line that matched for a discount. So the vendor gave us a discount. We'll take that. It wasn't on our PO, but we can quickly see that we have one unmatched line. All these little visual cues are helpful for the operators. They start paying attention to yellow and red. It's like a stoplight theory. Green means go, we're good. Yellow says, hey, it doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means I have a little caution. Red means, hey, stop, take a look, let's fix it. As you will see as we go through this. So as we step through, we also want to show you another example of, look, there's this find details, and there's calculate blank. And then we also have polar, which is purchase order line item reconciliation, which is what we just talked about. So this concept of this find details, if you get a new invoice in, by default, the software is not going to automatically register or read the line items. And it's done that way intentionally. Because with line items, if you've ever dealt with these, they could be nice, straightforward like we have here, but they could also be multiple lines making up one line. And so a lot of these software packages that go out and automatically find line items for you without any intervention struggle when it comes to multi-lines, because you could have a single line for this entry, the next line could be 2 or 3 lines, and then you're back to single. So a lot of those struggle with that. The cool thing with the data cap software is, the first time I see an invoice come in, or it sees an invoice come in, it's going to ask you, show me what that looks like. So let me go in, and as an operator, I will point to where the item number is, and I'll point to the description and show it where it is. And I'm going to do that for each of these items for the very first line item. Then I'll hit this find details. That's when you'll see it'll go through, and for the rest of the line items on that page and every page thereafter till we get to a new invoice, it'll find those line items for you and present them just like this. So you'll see that. And then if time allows, we'll go through and actually have a live demo and show you that on the fly when we get done. Moving right along, we have our vendor matching and validations. So in this case, in this scenario, you can see where we found this vendor, but nowhere on here is their vendor number located. But because we're able to find this vendor and do a lookup, we can then see that this is the value. It returns back, it matches their name and their zip code, and we can get their vendor ID. This is how you get this simplistic out of the box. You can do much more than this. If you wanted to say, okay, we think about like an AT&T, for instance. They're nationwide, but we have AT&T Wireless, we have Uverse, we have all these different flavors of AT&T. Well, believe it or not, we're going to have a different vendor based on what AT&T we are using, if it's wireless or whatever the case may be. So with that, we may need more specifics, more than just a name and a zip code. We may need an actual address. We can validate on any key criteria that we can pull off an invoice. We can go do a lookup and pull back this value. Just FYI, just want to make sure you can see that we're recognizing this. We found it, and we can see that there's this polar line item right here. That's telling me that I have one line that wasn't matched. So we got multiple ways to display that and see it. But once we do the lookup, I just manually clicked on vendor, and now you can see here it is. We found that vendor, and they're right there. I can click on that. It'll populate and put in my vendor number and make sure that the postal code and or vendor zip, however you want to list it, is there. These values are reading straight from your ERP solution. We mentioned briefly earlier about validation. So if we have a validation error, in this case, you can see it was 2/75/2010 that was actually put in. And as soon as we did that, it says, hey, that's not a valid date. Even if you were to say it was supposed to be done day, month, year, month, day, year, however you want to look at it, that's not a valid date. So it turns it in red. It also, down here at the bottom, if you can see it, gives you a little message saying it's either not a valid date or in the proper format. The reason for this is it quickly draws the operator's eyes to this so we can see it and know what we have to work with and what we need to fix. Some people like this down here. We commonly put in this open area a little status message box so people can see the message right up top per field. And when they click on a field, it'll update that message box. You can have all kinds of things be visual cues for the operator to know what to expect. We're just showing you that out of the box, what you get is what you see. We kind of look at, and we mentioned multi-page invoices. Here's one that's got 2 pages. We can see that it captured these line items, and it's on line item 2 right now. You can see that's highlighted. I'm on line 2 of 23. Well, obviously there's not 23 line items on this page. We can go to the second page and see that, but the key is knowing that we got a multi-page invoice and we're still able to pick up all those line items from there. Not to mention we can get the total off the last page. You can have this set up and do all kinds of things. Out of the box, it's going to try to find that total on the last page. We find, depending on what currency you're talking about, are we talking about US dollars? It could be Canadian, could it be rupees, it could be yen, depending on what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with just US or North American invoices, they're pretty standard. If you start talking about invoices that come from the UK or Asia or anywhere else in the world, they introduce new concepts that are interesting and present challenges if you think in only one fashion, and that's in the US fashion. So the cool thing about this is it's set up that you can collect and process invoices from 90 plus languages and handle that same amount of different currencies, as well as different dates and how you may have decimals. So we can see in our shipping, for instance, we've got a decimal place and then 2 digits. That's US standard. Well, in some locations, the decimal gets replaced with a comma, and where we put a comma in the US, they're going to have a decimal. And then you get some that have no decimals, and then you get some that you have to go out past 2 digits. So all these things can be accounted for and handled. It's just a matter of defining the business rules so that we know how to set the software up. Okay, let's talk about three-way matching, another key criteria within this whole process. As we look and we see there's all kinds of things here that are happening. So as we go through it and we want to have some kind of evaluation on this three-way match, we need to really say, are we evaluating and are we matching against everything? Did we get all the key criteria when it comes to finding an actual invoice? So did we get all the vendor name, the vendor number, invoice, these things that you see on the screen, those are required fields, and then in addition to some others. But then it doesn't even touch on, do we talk about anything with line items or not? This is just an example of how this particular invoice approval workflow was set up, so we can check for three-way matching, meaning that did we have a PO If this was an invoice that had a PO number on it, did the PO exist in our system so we can validate every line item and the total to make sure they match? We can also match against a packing slip. Was a packing slip inside the system? Did it have the PO number assigned to it so that we know PO and or invoice, so we can do a three-way match to make sure we have all three. If we have all three, we should be in good shape. We can approve it, or do we need to deal with it and do something different? The other thing that you can add on to this whole evaluation queue is, did the PO total and the invoice total match? And then you can have a rule that says shipping could be included. It wasn't part of our PO. If we know it on our PO, great. If it's not there, did the shipping values match? Are they different? Did we add in tax? Did we not know that? All these kind of things are all part of an evaluation step that we can then know how to properly hand that off to someone else. You can even think about limits of approval. So let's talk about, even with a PO invoice, even though I have a PO, if it's above my approval threshold as an accounting clerk, I may have to go through and send it over to the manager because it's such a high dollar threshold. Really common in non-PO invoices, like expense invoices, that if we get that invoice in, I can approve anything that's $1,000 or less, but over that, then Jamin's going to have to approve it. And then if it gets over 10,000, which may be her approval limit, then Tom has to approve. So you can have as many approvals as you need to based on key criteria, i.e. spending limits. So when we talk about PO invoices, that's obviously one that has a PO number attached to it. You have a non-PO invoice, which could be an expense invoice, much like a utility bill. Credit card statements commonly come through these kinds of applications, and we're trying to match those up and say, okay, do we need to capture every line item and do some kind of reconciliation with that? Depends on your accounting practice, depends on how you're set up and what you want to do. Maybe you just want the totals to know what you've got and then store that away, and maybe you need to validate every single line item. So all that is something to think about. So if we start looking through this approval workflow scenario, we have some different things to look at. Now you're seeing a scenario of OnBase, and we're looking at the OnBase workflow, for instance. The first thing we see is on the first arrow, we can see that we're looking at a specific queue inside of the workflow. In this case, we're looking at the GL coding queue. We can see here's our inbox right here. These are my documents. I've got 4 different invoices to work. I can quickly label this however I want. I can see invoice number, vendor name, invoice date. There's a whole plethora of things here for real estate. I cut it off, but you can see it. I can see my invoice right up here. And then these are the tasks that I am assigned and allowed to do. So you can see these could be anything you want in your workflow. We're showing you an example that we could send this to an exception queue as we're going through and we're evaluating this. Maybe we're finding that, hey, this did not have all the necessary values we needed to capture. So what do we do with it? Well, we can definitely go through and send it to an exceptions queue where somebody's going to have to deal with it that has maybe the ability to go through and find this vendor and say, hey, this vendor is not in our system. We had the wrong vendor matched. We said, okay, when I looked at this earlier, I thought this was really supposed to be Anderson Technologies versus Ender Consulting. So I put in the wrong vendor name and number. Now, as I'm coding this, I can see, oh, it's really Anderson Consulting. That's not right. So as I go to change that and look for this vendor, I don't even have this vendor listed. I can now send it to exceptions where someone who's dedicated to working on getting the W-9 and registering vendors can process that and then get a separate workflow if you want, and then it can come back for approvals after the fact. So you have all kinds of different things to work with. Just know that these are examples of what's there. So let's talk about AP workflow features. What's the point? What do we need to do those for? Well, we have approval limits, right? We kind of talked about those. One of the big things is load balance queues. Oftentimes we may need to allow people to take time off. I know it's a crazy concept, but it might happen. So as people take time off, we need automatic coverage so that if someone's going to be gone, we can pick up a slack without having to reassign. That is an option. You can manually reassign it. Let's say that somebody calls in sick that day. You could come in and manually, as an administrator, change the workload from, say, Jack to Jamin, so that Jamin now is in charge of everything that Jack was doing. And then another way to look at this is it's very common practice for AP clerks to be assigned. For instance, like clerk 1 could be assigned with vendors that name starts with letter A through D. And so then anybody that falls outside of that, maybe they go to E to K, assigned to clerk 2, so on and so forth. So again, you have one queue to look at from an administrative standpoint. I can look at everything in one queue, all my different vendors and all their different invoices if I want to from an administration standpoint. But when each individual clerk goes in, they only see their specific work. So it's very easy to monitor from an administration standpoint, and then it dives down into and separates the work out by certain criteria. In this scenario listed, the actual vendor names. Then we talked about handling different approval levels. So if we go through, again, we mentioned that maybe I have up to $1,000. After it passes that, it may have to go to a second approval. And maybe the second approval is all you need. You can set these up to have as many layers as you want. We talked about the three-way matching. This is something where you can go in and say, okay, if it is a PO invoice, we need to make sure we have the PO, we have the package slip, sometimes called a voucher, that we go in and check to see. And we take it a step further in our workflow. Not only can we say we have the PO, the package slip, the invoice, we can also make sure that as the last step in our workflow, a check was cut, and we can even put a copy of the check image inside of OnBase for approval, so we can make sure, okay, the check really went out. So if the vendor calls up and says, hey, we never got your check, if you're still doing paper checks, we never got your check. So if that's the case, I can go in as AP clerk, look and say, oh yeah, it's dated February 14th. It went out on February 14th is when it was cut. You should have it in a few days. So quick and easy way to see what's out there, what's available. As we kind of saw in the previous slide, we can have a primary screen for our primary invoice, but it's very nice and easy to have a secondary monitor or even a secondary view, so you can split your screen and see your invoice as well as other documents, maybe a PO that you need to reference, and you can see that quickly and easily. Common to have system tasks out there that do not require human intervention. Another very powerful thing about AP workflow automation is we can automatically do a lot of these checks in the background and only interact with humans when needed, so that we can be more efficient and have true automation. Our goal is end-to-end, straight through processing. If we don't have to have anybody touch it, in a perfect world, that would be ideal. Not always the case, but very common that we can go through and process many invoices with straight through approval, especially if they're PO invoices, because then we have key criteria to match against. A big common thing is to check for duplicate invoices. Very important to think about as vendors say, oh, I didn't get paid in time, maybe they didn't get it, I'll send it again. Well, the last thing you want to do is pay a vendor twice for the same invoice, so we can do duplicate checking to make sure we're good to go. Some people like to put that in your capture slide and put that into the whole capture software. You can, but what do you do in the capture world if you have duplicates? Really, the advanced capture world is meant to capture the data from the invoice, put it into your workflow solution, and you deal with that there. So many times we find people trying to do too much with that capture solution and make it be a full-blown automation AP workflow, when in reality, treat it what it is. Yes, a lot of these capture solutions can do workflow, but that's capture-based workflow, meaning I was going through, I was going to try to retrieve it and look at this information. I can't find the vendor in my lookup. I may put that on a hold and deal with it there in the capture world. Then again, I may let that go through, and then we truly have a entire workflow set up inside of OnBase so we can deal with that. There's all kinds of things to think about. Just make sure you don't make your capture portion too complex. That is a biggest key we see with people, is they try to make it too complex on the capture side and not invest the time in the workflow side. Just a teaser here for a little bit. Once you're this far, so let's say we're talking about capturing our invoices and putting them through the workflow. Well, that really gets us right next to the step of having vendor management. When we have vendor management, we can truly monitor our vendors to say, okay, what's our overall satisfaction? Do we need to look for another vendor because our current vendor isn't meeting our timelines? We're having issues. So do we need to track anything like yearly renewals, or did they have short payments quite often? And we can monitor all of this and say, look, they keep coming through and having short shipments, so we're having to short pay them. And then we have to get a credit memo, and we're going back and forth and seeing all this history. Well, all of that we can track inside of vendor management, which again is a part of OnBase that we can build out. We already have the OnBase solution. We already have the workflow. It's just one step further that we can look and talk about truly managing our vendors as well. Jamin, I'm doing a lot of talking here. Everybody good? You're not getting inundated with questions? Are you just waiting for me to take a breath?
You're doing great.
Okay. I don't want to be that rude guy that doesn't come back and give you a chance to interrupt.
Oh, don't worry. I'll take care of it.
I love it. Okay. This is another example of the on-base workflow. Just kind of wanted to show you a different look and feel. Now notice we're on a different queue, but the cool thing to think about here is I'm looking at this before I saw my inbox here. Now I'm able to see what's called a related document, meaning that I'm able to go through here and quickly see, here's my invoice, there's my purchase order. It's just a click away. I can access that and pull it up right next to it, or I can pull it up on a different monitor. But the cool thing is, by simply looking at what's called a related document inside of OnBase, I can not only see my invoice, my PO, but without even going anywhere, I can see that I don't have a matching packing slip. So if this is supposed to be a PO invoice that we're supposed to have products received and we're supposed to have a packing slip, I know I can't process it because I'm missing the packing slip. So again, that comes up right here. What do we need to do with this? Maybe this needs review. Maybe it needs to go to hold. All these options, again, are something that you look at and deal with and set up different options based on what your business requirements are. So there's our missing packing slip, as you can see. Quick and easy part of OnBase. Probably the most important thing we get asked, or the most common asked question, the most common question we get is, what integrations? I have this ERP. Do you guys integrate with that? Well, OnBase can integrate, and DataCap can integrate with a lot of different ones. We're going to show you some examples of the top tier. Again, I mentioned the Gartner or the Forrester Wave that has out there that mentions these top ERP solutions. We can talk about these here. We'll pull out the top few just so you can see it, and then kind of give a generic example at the end. For those people that are hardcore into these different solutions, like an Oracle JD Edwards Enterprise, if you will, here's your highlights. We got the technical highlights and then feature highlights. What does that mean to us? Well, it means it's nice and cool that we can have a full integration with JD Edwards, where we can actually push the data right in and have a bi-directional flow from OnBase to JDE. We can do that from DataCap, where we can do a lookup and get the vendor name and vendor number. Likewise for the POs, we can match against all the different line items. But then in OnBase, we can actually take that a step further and have bi-directional communication, where we can actually post to JD Edwards and be able to pull that information in from JD Edwards and go from there. Here's an example of a screen that you can see as we're in JD Edwards. We're looking at this. We want to go through and see what we've got. As we're pushing everything through, we want to see what it looks like. Here's another example that you can see as we come through and see a different screen within JDE, so we can have all that information there. Now we're on to SAP, probably your biggest robust out there that's for you. There's a lot of integration with SAP. SAP has some specifics that they don't call it proprietary, they call it their specific details when you interact with their system. We've had a lot of different solutions built around SAP. Hopeful that those of you that want to use it and have SAP, if you need a capture front end, if you need a workflow, we can handle both of those because we've done a lot of work with SAP. Here we can talk about it, see that again, technical and feature highlights. If we look at this screen, this particular screen is what's called an OnBase application, aka a workview solution. So if you're familiar with OnBase, that low-code solution that's available to you to build out your applications and do different things. In this scenario, we're looking at this. We have this invoice, as you can see, the vendor detail in the top left corner, your header information of your actual invoice, and then you have your line items down below. Now we're talking about taking this to the next level. I have this information. I want to post it to SAP. What do I do? Well, here we go. I'm going to take it a little further. I got more line items to deal with. What do we do? So we're going to take it to another screen and say, here's my PO information. I pulled all of this information from SAP to make sure that when I go to validate this information, I have it matched up item to item or line item to line item. And you can see not only do we have our different cost centers here and our profit centers, we have it all right there so that we can pull directly and not have a typo, not have to go through and say, oh, well, I thought our cost center was really 999. And it's not. I can see that I can validate that, make sure I have a proper cost center right then and there for every line item as it goes through. So that way, when it posts to your SAP solution in this scenario, it is perfect. It's matching up. There's no exceptions, and life should be good. Here's yet a different screen of the SAP line item functionality. We can talk about all our condition codes. If you're ever worked with SAP, you have a ton of conditions. As you go through, we can talk about the different types with respect to calculations, and you could even have different rates that are available to you based on currency. It could be based on location, so that you have all these different options that are available to you on the condition codes. Again, just showing another level deep of how the integration can work. A lot of people like to see a side-by-side comparison. What we've done here is taken an OnBase client. In this case, this customer is using OnBase 16. So we had the OnBase on the left-hand side, we had SAP on the right, just to show you that you can have a one-to-one scenario. And if you're not familiar with OnBase, this is your personal page. Within your personal page, you can actually have these different, what we call tiles set up. In this case, these are my invoices. I'm watching a queue. Here we want to have what's been transferred to SAP, and then here we're going to transfer to SAP. You can see different queues and quickly get to those without having to go through and click on a workflow tab and then go to your individual workflow you want to go to, then go to your queue. You can just go straight there. It's like having a favorites on your dashboard. Okay, Workday. This is another one that's commonly coming up where people are working with Workday, and it's probably becoming the most popular ERP out there. It's all arguable, right? Everybody can say, oh, we're the best, but this one is coming on hard and strong, just so you guys are aware. Highland is a certified Workday partner, so they can actually integrate and have a certified solution, which is very important when you start talking to Workday. And when they go, and if you're not a certified partner, you will not get the same level of support, and you cannot have a guaranteed solution. The nice thing is Highlands went through this work and this process to get certified, and that is a long, more than 2-year process that they did to get certified, but they are there and good to go. So again, here's another example of capturing all of our data inside of this AP solution, and then also having our purchase order line items so we can do pairing. As you'll see down here, here's all based on this PO, here's everything we got in the solution. As we go through, here's what it looks like in Workday if we want to see how that looks, so we can pull that in and see this in progress work for this particular invoice and PO. And as we go through, here's a link right to the document. This is the thing that probably makes the people from Workday, the users of Workday, I should say, just go ballistic. They love it because now I can simply have a direct link right into our document. They think it's all part of Workday, which is great, but in reality, this is pointing back to OnBase. It'll pull it up. The users still think they're in Workday, but they're really being brought up the invoice inside of an actual OnBase viewer. The cool thing about that is now I can manage these invoices. I can put record retention around that. My full governance between records management is behind there, as well as the full history. So that anytime somebody views it, prints it, they change a value on that invoice as far as one of the keywords they're using the metadata to store that with, all that's captured in the history. So we lose all that if you try to store that inside of Workday itself. If you try to store the invoice inside of there, you lose your governance for records management, you lose your history capturing ability to be able to have one place to manage all of your documents and all your records. So taking this a step further, we want to show you another example. The previous example was a PO actual invoice. This is a non-PO if you want to see how that works. We can see this screen pop up for us and know what we got. We get into more specific items and different things. You'll see the reason why we do this, we call it a basic invoice and need posting errors. We need to know real time if we post something to any ERP, in this case we're talking Workday, if we had any errors, we need to know those real time so we can fix it. So we have a little tab right here that was going to give us the status message, and anything that may have happened that went wrong, we'll know about it right away. It's not like it's a behind the scenes black box kind of magic that says, oh, it didn't work, and I have no visibility to it. You'll absolutely have visibility to it, and you can see everything you got. So we take this a step further. Here it is. Right now, I'm ready to push this over and send it over to Workday, and you can see there's my information I'm going to push. And I know it's going to go through and match up because I have my cost center. I have everything matching exactly for what's in my ERP and not anything that I went through and pulled off and tried to manually data enter and potentially have a typo. Moving on, Microsoft Dynamics. Again, we have your technical features and your, your technical highlights and your feature highlights. The cool thing about this is knowing that we can do GL coding and PO line pairing right from D365 as well as we have a View On-Base Documents button now. That didn't exist before. We were using App Enabler. You can still use App Enabler with Microsoft Dynamics, but we're also now having the ability to put in a button inside of Dynamics 365. So if you want to have this and post to Dynamics, then you can just pull your on-base documents back up. Here's again another screen that you can see where we're ready to have a PO information, a PO invoice. As we look at Dynamics, we start logging into Dynamics. Okay, here's step one. Step two, I go into a little bit further if I want to see my vendor invoices that are available to me. And now as I pull that up, a specific vendor invoice, I can see that I have that. But the cool thing is I need to see the on-base document that's related to this invoice and this record inside of Dynamics. I now have that ability to click on the on-base document and we'll pull this exact invoice up. You can even set it up so that it launches what's called a folder view or a actual file view. So if you want to have a foldering view, you want to see an entire folder where you can see the purchase order, the line item, the purchase order, the invoice, anything else that may be there. Likewise, you could pull up just the invoice. Infor, so we got Lawson S3. There's multiple versions of Lawson. We'll talk about several of those, but here's your technical and feature highlights to kind of go through quickly. I won't read those to you, but the cool thing is we talk about Lawson API, or APIA, sorry. I do that every time. I'm so used to the program methodology of API, but there's Lawson APIA, same kind of scenario. And then we talk about Infor Cloud Suite as well. Those are our three Lawson kind of capabilities we're talking about to interact with and go forward with. So if we look at this, here's our Infor Payables Manager. If we want to see that, right there, there's an open on-base. You can see the file. So we're actually pushing that link to that document over to Infor for Lawson to have, and then we're able to pull that back. Again, you can use App Enabler with that. That means it's always running in the background, and you have to have that installed. If you want to have it so that it only opens up on-base when they click on this on-base button, you can do so. Sometimes it's important to think about that, those kind of things when you're looking at the actual cost of a license for on-base. Do I need a workflow license? Do I need a name license? Do I need to just be able to pull it up ad hoc? You know, all these things are items to consider. We get into more generically saying any ERP system that's out there, your homegrown solutions, the ones that we did mention here. We can talk about different integrations if they're with SQL Server or Oracle, and we need to talk about pushing data to and from, whether it be via SQL or API, or even a comma-separated file or XML. All these are very common that we work with all the time, and it doesn't have to be some fancy, big, high-name ERP like an SAP. It could simply be something that you all have created, and we need to interact with it. So to kind of show you again, just a different look and feel. Here's a much more simplistic invoice that we're talking about dealing with. In this case, we only capture the header and footer information from the vendor line, and we want to push it over to any AP solution. As we can see, boom, we posted that data right to that invoice or that AP solution. Something new that's out that Highland introduced within the last 12 months is you have this concept of portals. Highland's come out with new portal solutions, kind of redone most of their portal solutions that are out there, but specifically for AP, since that's what we're talking about, they have this whole content portal for AP that allows customers to come in, allows vendors to come in and be able to upload their invoices, see the status of their invoices. Again, all powered by on-base workflow and on-base in the background, supplying all this information to the portal, but the portal just gives you a nice, common, easy button, if you will, for the interface so that people can see where their invoices are and if they're going to get paid, when they're going to get paid, have they already been cut so that we know we're going to receive that payment. So that's quick and easy to see that right there. Moving right along to reconciliation. As we get through this, just a quick way, do you go through audits? Do you have to go through and account for every document that comes in? Where is it at? What do we need to do with it? We need to talk about that. We're going to talk about DC Recon quickly. That was the solution I mentioned earlier that we wrote that integrates with the capture solution as well as with your backend ERP as well as ECMs. We also use this with respect to doing conversions. So if you're converting out of one ECM solution and you're going into another ECM solution, the DC Recon will allow you to say, I pulled out 5 documents from my old legacy, and I'm pushing in 5 documents into the new. on-base solution, if you will, then I can go back and reconcile that I got the same amount of pages, same amount of documents, file size, everything is there. I have a full history of it. So just FYI. We come with, our DC Recon comes with out-of-the-box reports that are kind of needed. They're specifically around the capture solution on some of these items with respect to, did we receive everything and get it processed, like your SLA report for straight through processing? Was it actually done? Did we meet our SLAs? Or you can just say, hey, I got an 8-hour SLA. If I receive a document today and I scan it in, I have 8 hours to get it through the system and into my workflow. You can even extend that outside of the capture solution and say, okay, you can utilize the same thing, the same report, and just say, it's okay that I captured it in my invoice or my automated data entry solution like DataCap, and I got it out of there. I met my SLA for that portion of it. But then what about dealing with it through the on-base workflow and making sure it's approved and then getting posted to the ERP? How do I know where it's at any given time? Well, you use these out-of-the-box reports to be able to say, yep, I got a three-way match. I know that it left the capture solution, went into the on-base workflow solution for approvals. It's approved now and went into the ERP solution, so I can make sure I have all three captured. That the Delta report down here shows you if for any reason that you don't have one of those selected. So it came out of the capture solution, but we don't show it in the ERP or the ECM. Well, we need to be able to validate that, and I'll give you a quick report to show you what happened. Some just examples. If you talk about using your capture solution and more than just AP, you can see how many of the documents did it actually identify properly versus needed manual interaction. You can kind of see different things that are there. You step through, there's your SLA report with nice visuals to say, okay, how many of these are there? And we can see quickly that if we're meeting our SLAs, they're in green. If we're already used 80% of our time, it's going to show up in yellow, and anything that's past due that should have been out the door is actually showing up in red. I can see the specific batch numbers that are out there for that, the total number that are out there, as well as seeing the ability to handle all these different documents and know that I may need to repurpose some of my workers to say, okay, in this example, I'm dealing with dental claims. I need to move some people that are doing data entry from a different project over to working on the dental claims because I have these amount of batches that are past due. We've mentioned a little bit about Threeway Match when it came to AP world and doing all that. Here we're talking about a two-way versus three-way reconcile. So sometimes you don't have an actual ERP solution. You're doing everything out of your ECM solution like OnBase. We can pay everything and do everything there. If that's the case, then I'm really going to say I left my capture solution and it went into my document management solution. So there's a two-way match. That's all I have. It could be that you don't have a doc management solution, you have a capture solution and just a payable solution. So that's the case, again, two-way match. Or we talked about the three-way where it's your line of business as well as your on-base solution and obviously coming out of the capture solution. We talk about this, we say if you need to see more, hopefully you're intrigued by now and want to say, hey, how can I help automate our AP solution and any solution for that matter? This is where we encourage you to come through and ask questions, maybe give us examples and let us work with you to show you DataCap and OnBase and DC Recon and how they all work together. Okay, Jamin, I'm finally done talking. Let's ask some questions and answers.
I think it looks like you've covered all the questions so far. We don't have anything in the queue.
That's what you call shock and awe, right? It's like, wow, this is awesome. I got it all.
Comprehensive, right?
Awesome. Okay. Very good. Well, we would be remiss if we didn't go through and talk about on-base managed services. This is a very cool concept that we feel like we're pushing out and a lot of people are jumping on board with. Some people don't have the ability to have a full-time on-base administrator. They have so much stuff going on. A lot of times people get pulled into that. They know OnBase from like a user perspective. They don't know how to administrate it on a daily basis or weekly or monthly. Sometimes you just need somebody to bounce ideas off of and have a true partner to come back and say, have you ever done this? Or we're talking to HR and they're talking about doing this. Well, part of your OnBase managed services gives you the ability to have a partner right there and a person working part-time or even full-time that could be there, and you can bounce these questions off of them and ask these questions and come back to the entire team where we can provide more expertise than maybe that one person has. So we're here for you to help offer any OnBase managed services as we can to make sure that we can help you out and make sure your OnBase solution is working and functioning as best as possible. So we're going to have more of these webinars coming out. Hopefully you'll send some suggestions over to Heather on what you'd like to see. And we will definitely be covering some contract management and different kind of vendor management solutions throughout the rest of the year. Okay. I did it, Jamin. I made it within the hour, even with a
Well
little snafu.
Well done. Well, thank you, Jack. That was really informational, and hopefully you have sparked a lot of ideas and thoughts that we'll hear back directly from our attendees with some questions, or maybe someone will come up with a Stump the Geek question offline. Anyway, we are all ready and available at TSC. As you can see here, we purposefully exist to help everyone on the call and all of our clients achieve the most out of their on-base and other technology investments. So we appreciate everyone's time today.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. See you later.
Thanks, Jack.